going to start with Rob. And we're going to start with Rob, who's going to talk about critical discourse analysis and using that with critical realism.
Okay, shall I carry on?
Please.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along. We're up to I think we've got just over 30 people now, so we're just building up our head of steam. So we've got so I'm going to talk to you first, and then Lee's going to step in. Sadly, Wendy we'll try and fit Wendy in at some point later in the course. Because for various reasons we weren't able to fit everyone in. It's all been, as you know, it's all been a bit of a squeeze to fit everyone in. Wendy very sweetly and kindly stepped back to allow a bit of extra time today. So thanks for that, Wendy. I think she might be present. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about a critical realist approach to critical discourse analysis. So how critical realism can contribute to critical discourse analysis. And but first of all, because we didn't manage to get to this, this is a bit of a sort of different topic, but it's all relevant. We haven't had a chance to talk about the two forms of power yet. So before I talk about critical discourse analysis, I'm going to talk very briefly about power. And I can't recommend enough that if you want to read about power, that you turn to some of Priscilla's work on in this area. And there's a reference at the bottom here. We've mentioned about this, I think it was last time, but and a lot of you probably are in the same boat that I was in a few years ago if you're PhD candidates. But a lot of people will be familiar with Foucault, familiar with other academics, other great minds who talk about power. And certainly in a Foucauldian sense, that power is not particularly defined. It's ever present, but it's not particularly defined. But Bhaskar defines power or separates power into P1 and P2, power 1 and power 2. So I'll just let you read this quote. So P1 is creative, emancipating power, while P2 is its shadow side of negative, coercive power. So we're able to talk now about power being either negative or positive. So we talked, Andrew Sayre was talking about values, and so we're sort of applying values to power, so we can talk about good and bad. And so this is Priscilla's, this is one of her slides from a previous PowerPoint. So we can then split this up into the empirical, the actual, and the real. So power 2, I'm just going to go down the first column here. So for power 2, so feelings of being powerful over others or powerless. So anxiety, fear, coercive control, gaslighting, discourse of terror, which Priscilla's put in there. And then the actual activity, so being forceful, violent and threatening acts, criminal justice, war, political and economic control, and then Foucauldian power. So I was talking about Foucauldian before, so it can come across as sort of eternally negative in a Foucauldian sense. And then the real, so meaning and motives to control, possess, deprive others of their possessions, revenge, loss, suffering and despair. So when you come across these sort of negative conceptions of power, you might want to talk about in your research, talk about power 2. But then moving to the next column, you've got power 1. So experience. So we're talking now more about experiences of freedom. So in the empirical, freedom, creativity, shared problem solving. And we're going to get later on in the course into meta reality, where things like shared problem solving and working together will become more relevant. But there are ways that we can demonstrate that experience. Then the actual activity, so this again, conditions of justice and peace, overcoming difficulties, preventing crime and war, and the ethic of care, which is something that Priscilla's written about over her whole career incredibly clearly for us. And then again, the real, the motives to be free. So these are the things that are underlying the actual activity and the empirical manifestation of it. So the motives to be free, to create, to share, to flourish, to fulfill and forgive, to trust and hope. So all of these things associated with flourishing, which is what, one of the main focuses of critical realism. So there's a power. So all you really need to, just to simplify this, is that we can conceive of power now in two ways, power 1 and power 2. And that this will help. You'll find, I mean, we'll talk about this later when we get to breakout rooms, but you can talk amongst yourselves about what these might mean, or expressions of power one, power two that you might find in your research. So I'm now going to move on from power. So I'm going to leave power aside, and we're going to move on to. So I'm just going to ask someone, can you just mute if you're not on mute, please. So I'm going to move on now to talk about critical discourse, and specifically applied critical discourse analysis. So I'm just going to try. There's someone. There we go. Okay, thanks. You've gone on mute now. Thank you. So applied critical discourse analysis. So this is me sitting down on the floor in the classroom that I used to teach in. This is in about 2015. This was before I started doing my PhD, before I started doing research into my academic research. And as you can see, I'm working in a majority Muslim community. I worked in majority, just by coincidence, in majority Muslim communities for all the 13 years that I was teaching. And something strange happened while I was teaching. Suddenly, all of these kids who, as you can see, there's quite a rowdy class. Those of you here are teachers, a fantastic group of children, always engaged as teenagers are in engrossed in political discussion, ethical chats. And suddenly they all became silent. They all stopped talking. And this was at the same time as the prevent duty was introduced. Now, most people if you're based in the UK, then you'll know what this is. But for those who aren't based in the UK, the prevent duty is the strategy, is the branch of the British government's counter-terrorism strategy that is concerned with extremism. And what this strategy said was, it said that me as a teacher, so all the teachers in this country, also anyone that works in the National Health Service, so any medical professional, was duty bound, or is now duty bound, to report signs of, in heavy scare quotes, extremism in their patients, in their pupils. Straight off the bat, this seemed to me to be totally at odds with my sort of educational aspirations for these children. Total breach of trust that I might report teenagers to the police for having apparently extreme political views. I also was incredibly concerned by this, because I'd found in the past that, and as many other people who are teachers here will have found, is that for children, teenagers will have heated political debates. They'll test out ideas by saying perhaps extreme things. And whether that is a white kid expressing a racist view, or any kid expressing a racist view, or whether it is, as had happened, more than a handful of occasions, young or older Muslim boys talking about an aspiration to travel abroad to Afghanistan to take part in some kind of violent conflict. Those conversations, by having the conversations, we'd always managed to mediate the whatever the disagreement was, and the racist threat was never carried out, because we managed to sort of find some common ground. I'd always rather have that conversation with the kids. Or an example of the children having these aspirations to travel, Muslim children, they never traveled, because when they had the conversation with me about the war on terror, they'd find that I was opposed to the war on terror. They'd find that I was opposed to the invasion of Iraq. I was opposed to the invasion of Afghanistan. And through me as their teacher, they'd learn that they could write to their MP, they could take part in protests, and they could become democratic citizens. So for me, the conversation that prevent duty was stopping seemed to be problematic. And this was really hammered home for me when, soon after this, these three girls from Bethnal Green Academy, which was the school next door to where I was teaching, travelled to Syria. And many of you will have read about Shamima Begum and the terrible things that, either being killed in airstrikes, having being married off very young, having children dying in infancy, and horrific things. That it's my belief that those children, no one knew that they were planning on travelling. Before the prevent duty was in place, I had conversations with children about travelling, and they hadn't done as a result of those conversations. So this seemed to me to be a not very good thing. But there were certain things that I noticed about the way that extremism was being used in government documentation that led me to look at the policy and to not look at the children. And there was also an ethical dimension to this, of not wanting to look at and problematize the children, because I didn't see the children as the problem. I saw that there was a problem with the government strategy and with the discourse that was emerging around counter-extremism. This was an emergent discourse. It wasn't something that had been in politics before this point. So I ended up finding, spoke to John O'Regan, who ended up becoming my PhD supervisor, and he subsequently, this was a few years later actually, but it's very relevant to talking now. He wrote this excellent paper, and if anyone is interested in critical realism and discourse analysis, I can't recommend this paper enough. But he defines, and I just want to look at the lower box here, he looks at, within the context of discourse and text, he defines the real, the actual, and the empirical. And this is based on what Bhaskar writes about in Enlightened Common Sense, the book that I've referred to a few times, which there is a section in there that talks about critical discourse analysis. Sadly, it's not attributed to it. That section stems from conversations that John O'Regan had with Roy when he was still alive. But there are going to the second box here. So semiosis or discourse at the level of the real. So there is so I believe that critical discourse analysis is realist if carried out in the right way. Texts at the level of the actual, so actual text, and then interpretation of the text at the level of the empirical. So I'm now going to talk you through my research very quickly. It's going to be a very, very quick rush job this, but talk you through my research in the context of the real, the actual, and the empirical, to try and show you how these categories can be fitted in to critical discourse analysis and can help contribute to critical discourse analysis. So my empirical observations were that that there was a silencing in the classroom, and I wondered whether there was a connection between this and the prevent strategy, and I surmised that there might be a connection between this, and I started speaking out against the prevent strategy. This was before I came into academia. I contributed to quite a few national news reports in the newspapers and in the on TV news as well, criticizing the prevent strategy, and that ended up putting me in a privileged position where I had children who, some of these children in this picture here, who I taught, but even I had children who I'd never met before, who were at the same school that I was teaching in, were coming to see me during their break time, coming to see me at lunchtime, and confiding in me that they were also concerned about the prevent strategy, and started telling me that they were not speaking out in front of their teachers because they were worried about referrals. But because I'd been speaking out, they sort of were in a position to trust me to a certain extent, although they were still having to be very sort of hedge what they were saying, being very cautious about what they said to me, because I had a professional duty to report signs of extremism, again, heavy scare quotes. So these are my empirical observations. So I then turned to the actual texts. So this is something that's quite easy to do. You can search government documents for documents that contain the word extremism. So I collated a corpus of government documents referring to extremism. So these are the actual texts. So again, so we're talking about the empirical, the actual, and the real. So the actual texts that I was then looking at. And what I found from these texts from carrying out a corpus analysis, this is a very small part of my research, was I did a corpus analysis, which is where you use software to analyze the texts. And I found that there was a trend, and this trend is for the word extremism. Each one of these dots on this graph is a document, is a government document, and at 100% is the government's counter-terrorism strategy. And it's at 100% because 100% of the time that extremism appears in that strategy, it's preceded by the word violent. So it's the counter-extremism strategy in 2009 is only concerned with violent extremism. And then you'll see over time, when we get down to naught at the bottom of the graph, where there's a cluster at naught, that means that extremism is never preceded by the word violent. And as you can see, there's a fairly clear trend, but over time, the word violent is dropped from extremism. Now, this is significant because it shows that previously, extremism wasn't presumed to be violent. If it was presumed to be violent, you wouldn't put violent in front of extremism every time. Later on, over time, it comes to be assumed that extremism is violent. So that means that the government starts doubling down on their targeting of extremism. We get more and more policies, more and more duties placed on doctors and teachers to spy on their students and their people and their patients. So these are my empirical observations of the actual texts now. So here, empirical observations of the actual texts. So moving on, we're going to now try and talk about the real. So Roy Bhaskar talks about the semiotic triangle being the minimum requirement for understanding language. That's the semiotic triangle is the minimum requirement for the understanding of language. And for those of you, many of you who work with discourse will be very familiar with this, but just those that aren't. So with the semiotic triangle, starting at the top, we start with the signifier, so that is the word. So I'm talking about extremism here. Referent, that's what it refers to, so the object, so extremism as an object. And then the meaning, what the concept, so what is signified. So to understand language, you need these three different things. So putting this into the context of my research, I needed to work out semiotic triangle related to extremism. So what does this look like? And this is where a sort of critical realist process of retroduction comes in, is that you start trying to work out what the world must be like for this to be happening. And so this was my semiotic triangle, so the real generative mechanism behind extremism. And it turns out that there is a real generative mechanism for the promotion of violence. So I'm going to start at the top again with the words. I'm going to go around, so we're going around in an anti-clockwise way. So if you just work along with me, I've sort of glossed over, but radicalization and extremism are essentially synonymous terms. So just take, we're just going to accept that they essentially mean the same thing. And if you want to read more on that, you can read my book about it, or I've got a paper in the Journal of Critical Realism. So the words radicalization and extremism, they become synonymous with violence. That's what we saw in the graph that is just here. So they become more synonymous with violence over time. That means that radicalization and extremism are now conceptualized as violent. So those words, remember, they previously weren't seen as violent. They weren't conceptualized as violence. And now they're conceptualized as violent, progressively so over the course of this graph. That leads then to the state targeting radicalization and extremism. And again, over the course of this graph, from 2009 up to the present, certainly to 2015, the government were developing yet more strategies to police extremism. And from my examples that I discussed in the classroom, by silencing that debate, by silencing views that we might perceive as extreme, you've undermined a mechanism by which violence was previously averted. So that means that the referent who you're referring to has the capacity to become more violent or more likely to be violent. So whether that is the kid who is not having their racist aspiration mediated, those three girls who tragically traveled to Syria because they hadn't had a conversation with anyone where there might have been an opportunity to prevent that from happening. So then the meanings change to settle cognitive dissonance so that the words still make sense. And this cycle continues where we get the generation of violence, the words become more associated with violence, and we get violence further generated. So that is so we've looked at the empirical, the actual texts, and now this is the real generative mechanism for violence that I then defined by this process. And there are a few more things that I talk about in the book, but I'm not going to talk about them now because I was only due to talk for 20 minutes. So in summary, we've got the empirical observations of silencing in the classroom, the exploration of the actual texts, and we can further complicate that by saying that there were also empirical observations of the actual texts. Then the development of theory to describe real generative mechanisms for the silencing of debate in the classroom. and the promotion of violence. So in conclusion, so the counter-extremism strategy promotes rather than prevents violence. And I just want to just reflect for a moment just on the need to be serious in critical realism. We're talking about the world, and this is a serious endeavour. So I've just got a picture here of the Home Office. So throughout the course of my research, I do believe in not sitting in an ivory tower in the university and just writing about these things. We should engage with the world, and this is something that you'll see through Priscilla's writing, her work. She's constantly been engaged in the world, in the children that she's been researching, working with. So I have spent quite a long time arguing with people at the Home Office about this, and recently I've been asked, and I've delivered some training through the Civil Service Union to talk about these issues. And I think it's important that we do engage with, we're talking about real problems in the world, and it's important that we do engage with them in reality as well. So if you want to read a bit more about that, this is my book that you've been sent links about and things like that. And I don't know, Priscilla, what we want to do now, but we've got, do you want to do questions now, or should we move straight on?
Thank you very, very much, Rob. I should have said, by the way, everyone, that a few years ago, Rob was a PhD student attending this course, and presumably found it helpful. And since he qualified and passed his PhD, he's been fortunate enough to be working in academic posts, and long may this last. So we do hope this course will be helping some of you along your career in this way too, if you're interested in doing that. And also thank you very much, Rob, for this really clear example of critical discourse analysis linked to critical realism. And lots of you may be doing other kinds of work like grounded theory, lots of kinds of different research methods that you're working out how to combine with critical realism. Now, would anyone like to ask a question? I noticed that there's a nice point in the chat that, the chat that children are being forced to, I think, by Claire Poppy, also forcing children to attend British values assemblies and to have a poster in each, sorry, I can't see the rest.
So it's about, yes, British values. I mean, this is all tied up with the kind of rabid nationalism that we're living under at the moment in the UK, where one of the ways that you can demonstrate as a school, and someone here has pointed out that that Prevent also applies to higher education institutions, and my belief is that there's about to be a review of Prevent, which is going to force it into religious settings as well, so churches and mosques and synagogues. So I mean, talking about posters, British values posters. So you'll now walk into lots of schools will now have poster displays up that show Union Jacks and cups of tea, because that apparently demonstrates that they've embodied British values. And you sort of have to laugh at it. I mean, it's absurd, and it's incredibly harmful to children and doctors, patients, and people with mental health problems. But you sort of have to laugh at it, because it is absolutely absurd that putting a picture of the Queen up in the classroom is apparently going to stop the next acts of terrorism. But yeah, so thanks for that comment.
And also, if the values, if so-called British values are worthwhile and important, then every nation will have them. There's nothing particularly British about them.
It's a horrible nation to nationalise values. So just one question. Someone said, what program did you use to analyse your language? I mean, it's a very basic program, Wordsmith Tools, which is a free program that you can download, and and it handles, it can handle multiple texts, and will do sort of collocations and things like that. But if anyone's got any specific questions, then I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, as I said, there's a paper in the Journal of Critical Realism, or there's more detail in the book.
There's one here saying, would you recommend looking at media media reports and reinforce violence and extremism and the government strategy?
Yes, I mean, media reports are really interesting. I do talk about that in my book. One of the interesting points about extremism is that if you look at media reports, contemporary media reports of 9/11, you won't find the words extremism and radicalization. So I think I analysed, about 5 million words of media reports in the week after 9/11 and found extremism mentioned once. Whereas now, if extremism is everywhere, and that, I mean, that's what, that was, for me, that was a data point to see that this is a new phenomena that our politics are interested in extremism.
Rob, I think there's a hand up from, is it Saul? Or?
Yes, I saw that. So, is it Soleil?
Yes, it's me.
Hi.
So hi everyone. So my question to you, Professor, is if this method can be also applied to the study of, for example, of how USA and Russia represent each other in their media discourses within their countries and internationally.
Yes, I think that would be fascinating.
Thank
and
you.
Actually, there is a paper whose name I can't remember. Lee might know this, because I think it was in the Journal of Critical Realism quite a while ago. There's a Pakistani academic who wrote about media and political discourse in Pakistan that enabled the country to align itself with the war on terror. So how it looks at how political actors, including the media, normalized the war on terror to draw Pakistan into that conflict. So I think that would be a it's a great paper. I'll try and, once I've stopped talking, I'll try and dig out that paper, and I'll put the reference in the chat. But yeah, no, I think
or maybe.
Yeah, no, but I'll just no, but yeah, that's definitely a good one to use. And I think, yes, and I would totally agree that I think understanding the current kind of saber rattling of the US and Russia through political and media discourse, I think would be a very useful thing to do to understand what's going on.
Yes, or perhaps we could send any follow-up ideas in the midweek email when we send you resources and the plan for the next week, something like that.
Yeah,
Also, Bridie made the point that it's the Prevent programme an example of Power 2, and it's an excellent example, isn't it?
Yeah.
So shall we move on now? But first, to thank Rob very, very much. And I must say to you, everyone, that this course, which Roy started in 2007, and some of us took over in 2004, it would have collapsed 2 years ago, and that was it. But with Rob's help and his technical expertise, it's been revived again, and it's so great to see you all from around the world. Now, we were going to have Wendy Sims-Shelton, who she very, very kindly agreed with us that because the programme was a bit packed, it would be better to spend more time on 2 speakers with discussion. And so she very generously said she wouldn't speak this evening. And I expect some of you are very disappointed. We are going to put in the email some of her resources, and we're certainly going to involve her in any future courses. But now I would like to welcome Lee Price, because when I said some of us carried on Roy's course, Lee was one of the people. And Lee had helped Roy teach for years previously. And she is one of the most distinguished members, especially the most distinguished women, 2 or 3 of them, in critical realism, partly because Lee edits the Journal of Critical Realism, which I hope some of you will be writing for one of these days. Also, Lee did lots of work at Rhodes University in South Africa, establishing critical realism. And now she's working at the Inland University in Norway, of applied science.
Yeah.
Again, I assume setting up critical realism, Lee.
Yes, I am actually.
Yeah, and Lee's going to talk to us about, she could talk to us about practically anything, but I did ask her to talk about reproduction and climate change and with problems. So over to you, Lee, and welcome, and thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Well, it's more than a pleasure. And it's just wonderful that I'm here at the IOE, but I've managed to find a relatively quiet place, I hope. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time, and I actually have to leave as quickly as I can at 7 o'clock. So let me just give you the heading of my title. The title is Wicked Systems and Enlightened Common Sense. And hopefully it'll cover everything that you wanted it to cover, Priscilla. Okay, so I want to introduce myself quickly because just so you understand why I'm so interested in climate change and critical realism and education. So I started out, I'd always wanted to be an ecologist. And so
Lee, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Is it possible to put the slides on full screen?
Oh, I can try. I think it's down here. Is that better?
Oh, lovely. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Okay, so where I was in Zimbabwe, we couldn't do a straight master's degree. In ecology, I had to do a degree in biology first. But my aim was always to be an ecologist. And then when I had my daughter, it was really difficult to be an ecologist out in the field all the time. And so I decided, as many women do, that teaching was a great way to go. And so I got a PhD in education. And since then, I've done a lot of work in South Africa on questions of water resource management, and I've also worked on HIV education. And I was with, and I won't go into the rest because actually, Priscilla's done a very good job of describing my work with Roy. Okay, so enlightened common sense. So I've taken 3 quotes directly from Roy's book on enlightened common sense. And one of them is, he talks about all human societies, sorry about the noise, as having a proto-scientific account of the world. And basically, our job as academics is to kind of like demystify that early idea of science and come up with what he calls a more enlightened common sense. So early ideas of common sense would have been, I don't know, magical. You know, it made sense for people to be superstitious, for example. And over time, we've developed a critique of that so-called common sense. And really, we're still doing that. We like to think that we're hugely ahead of the medieval times, but sometimes I wonder. Okay, so we're constantly trying to develop our common sense. And the relevant question is how far realism has developed. And critical realism says, okay, we have to go beyond empirical realism. So empirical realism is where you think that what's real is what we can measure. And critical realism goes beyond that to include things like causal laws and universes. So when we say that we're a realist, we have to be very specific about what kind of realist we are. Are we most people would agree that what we can measure is real. But critical realism is a different kind of realism. It says some of the things that we can't measure might be real as well. Okay, so Roy said it's important not to identify lazily as a realist, these are his words, but to specify what kind of realism. And another kind of realism that we need to watch out against is something called anthroporealism, which is where we think that, which is really just where what we conceptualize becomes real, or so long as we think it, so the world becomes it. This is quite postmodernist. So that's also a kind of realism. Okay, now Roy said But there's no alternative to this transcendental realism, where we think in terms of structures and mechanisms. And I'll show you in a minute how this relates to wicked problems and how it relates to climate change. Okay, so transcendental realism is an essential part of the practice of any working scientist. And here's the irony of it. Mainstream positivist science is anti the transcendental. It only wants to believe that things are real if we can measure them. And the way it gets around this problem, because we have scientists who have to think in terms of these structures and mechanisms. They have to think in terms of causality. They have to have categories. But positivists don't believe that these things really exist. So there's this tension in practice. Scientists are acting in their practice, they're doing things, they're coming up with theories of structures, like social structures would be things like structures of racism. In climate change, we'd think of climate structures of weather, what's causing climate change, the structures of the universe, or the atmosphere, which result in the climate. So these are transcendental structures that are emergent from these empirical things. And weirdly enough, and this is why it goes against common sense, to me anyway, positivist science doesn't have an ontology for these transcendent things. Okay, so what I'm going to do today, a lot of critical realist work is really based on a critique of this absence of transcendental understanding in the social sciences. And what I want to do today is to show you how that absence of transcendental understanding affects our ability to fight climate change denial, for example, and in fact, just our ability to act on climate change. And I'm not sure if you can see all of this. It's a bit hard for me to see it, actually. I'll try and make you all smaller. Okay, so here's a diagram, a table that tells us about the different levels of reality in critical realism. Specifically, and here I'm relating it to climate change, the first layer. Okay, so what is climate change? Well, the structure that creates climate is the overall disposition of all planets in the universe, in which their atmospheric characteristics influence their climatic conditions. So this doesn't matter which planet you're in. I mean, Mars has climate. The moon doesn't, because it doesn't really have any gases. I think Mars has climate. But any planet that has sort of atmosphere will have a climate. Okay, now on Earth itself, the climate change mechanism is to do with carbon dioxide, which has specific characteristics. So when you heat up, when you shine a light on carbon dioxide, it very quickly absorbs heat. And this, it would do this. Teachers do this in the classrooms all the time with students. They fill up a bottle with carbon dioxide, put it next to a light source, and you can watch the temperature rise. So we know that this is a mechanism that happens. It's been demonstrated for a very long time. Okay. Then you have the actual patterns of events. Now, this is the part that positivist scientists are interested in. This is the way the Earth is currently, its temperature is increasing. So we're actually watching an increase in the temperature of the Earth over time. And the measurable entity, well, apart from the fact that we can actually see carbon dioxide heating up things in the laboratory, I mean, we can actually measure the increased temperature of the Earth. Okay, so yes, so we have the real level, the structure and mechanisms are both the real level, the event. So I'll just wait a second.
Lee,
yes.
I don't know if you want to try speaking for that person for a
second. Oh, they've gone out. Thank goodness.
Oh, have they? Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It's not ideal at all. I'm sorry, Priscilla.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the event is the actual level. Now, where does retroduction come into this? Okay, Well, it comes in at the structures and mechanisms. So our structures, we theorize them using retroduction. And retroduction is simply the logic that we use when we look at the things that we can measure, and we try and understand what caused them. So we can look at the Earth increasing in temperature, and we try and understand what caused that. And that is retroduction. And for the climate, it's impossible to test that in a laboratory because our Earth is too big. We can't carry out experiments on it. And what happens in climate change is that problem, that normal science or positivist science simply doesn't apply in the context of the Earth. Okay, we cannot do experiments on the Earth. That is a tension which is then exploited by the climate change deniers. So let me give you this example. So there's a physicist called Philip Bradby, and he frequently gives advice to the British Parliament. And this group, and he's part of this group, many people give advice, there's many people who are part of this group. I mean, most climate change deniers will understand the argument. And basically the argument is that climate science cannot be considered to be a proper science because it is missing out the initial scientific phase of inductive analysis of data. Okay, that's when you constantly see temperature rising, and so you inductively work out, oh, the temperature is rising. And maybe if it's correlated with the increase in carbon dioxide, you might have a theory of the carbon dioxide causing the rise. Okay, so climate change doesn't necessarily use that way of understanding climate change science. And neither can we carry out experiments on the Earth. Okay, so these climate change deniers utilize this tension where science is not properly theorized, because in fact it is absolutely fine to use retroduction to come up with knowledge, okay, even if we can't test it experimentally. And the way that we make sure that it's true is to the best, I mean, we can only do it fallibly, but to the best of our knowledge is through a process called judgmental rationality, where we compare different theories. Okay, so critical realists are able to make confident knowledge claims without necessarily going through the experimental phases of science. And of course, in social science, this is just the same, because we can't put people into experiments. We can't carry out social experiments on people in the laboratories. So can you see that there's a similarity between how critical realism helps us in ecology, because it helps us, it gives us a science we can use even though we can't put our ecosystems and our Earth into the laboratory. And that's the same for social science. It gives us a science we can trust even though we cannot, put people into laboratories. Okay, so what critical realism then does is it allows us to counter Bradby's arguments, and so it allows us to say, actually, it doesn't matter that we cannot predict, that our models don't predict the climate change exactly. And so what critical realism teaches us is that there's this open system. And so a mechanism might be functioning, but there may be other factors that prevent that mechanism from playing out perfectly predictably every time. So in climate change science, if, say, there's a lot of volcanic activity on the Earth for a few years, and there's a lot of smoke in the atmosphere, that will reflect the heat, and that will counter the heating tendencies. So in fact, we can find that the Earth may not warm for decades, and yet the climate change, or what I call the greenhouse effect, is still happening behind the scenes. Okay. So this is very important for us in order to counter climate change deniers, and also just in terms of the speed of action, because we have known about the mechanism of climate change for over 100 years. And really, it's just common sense. we should have been able to act decades and decades ago if we had a critical realist version of science, because there's this one person who was trying to raise awareness about climate change in the 1980s. And he said, nobody would believe him because at that point, the climate change hadn't registered in the empirical data. So we actually hadn't measured temperature changes yet. And yet those scientists already knew it was going to happen. Now, critical realism would have allowed us to act then. If critical realism was the common sense approach to science, which unfortunately it isn't yet, but if it was that generation's common sense approach to science, we would have had a much more powerful argument to start worrying about climate change way before it had started to, and these are his words, manifest in the data. Okay. Now, how does this relate to wicked problems? Okay, so wicked problems like climate change, when we think of them in terms of these millions of measurements, and we think that we absolutely have to have complicated models to work them out, or else some second generation systems theorists go the opposite direction and say, well, we can never understand wicked problems, so therefore we just have to hand things over to people into the communities and let them decide what they want to do. So they kind of wash their hands of the problem. But other people dealing with wicked problems like climate change want to really put their trust in these huge computer models. But in fact, critical realism tells us that although definitely there is a place for them and we need them, especially when we're working out what to do, but statistics and complex computer models are neither necessary nor sufficient to deal with wicked problems. So we also need just plain old retroduction, logic, and judgmental rationality. So in this case, just knowing about the greenhouse effect and the effect of extra carbon dioxide should have given us enough motivation to start changing things decades ago. And I often say that this is just the same, it's just the same as how we understand gravity. So we know that if we don't walk off, which is what David Hume, the classic positivist, said. He said there's no difference to leaving a building from the second floor as compared to from the ground floor door. But of course there is a difference, and we know that we shouldn't just walk off a high, tall building because we could kill ourselves. And that's common sense. And we understand that because we understand how gravity works. And that same kind of common sense is perfectly used. We can use it in many other contexts as well. Okay, so I think that's really all I wanted to say. And I think I've run out of time. So let me just stop sharing and open up for discussions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. That's brilliant. And as you say, gravity, well, physicists think of gravity as one of the greatest discoveries in the whole history of physics, don't they? But it's a retroductive guess. We'll never see gravity. We can't prove it. No. And the same, biologists are the same with evolution and natural selection.
Absolutely.
We can only see all the effects, but we really can't understand the cause or prove it or put it in a lab, as you were saying. And that should give us social scientists and interdisciplinary people confidence to think about retroduction as a very, very serious research method, as serious as induction and deduction. Yeah, great. And of course, climate change is the perfect example to illustrate this now, unfortunately, isn't it? Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if there are any questions. I don't think I've seen any. Oh, good. Guy would like to ask one.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee. I just have one question that that relates to I suppose, more social science research than research in natural sciences. And that's to do with this aspect of judgment rationality that comes forth in critical realist scholarship. I'm just wondering where the claims to authority can come with judgment rationality. How do researchers sort of come to conclusion as to what the best one is, if it's a framework that relies on a kind of epistemological relativism, if that makes sense? How can we claim that one judgment is superior to another?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's definitely not relativist. So Karl Popper made a very important discovery to do with epistemology when he talked about falsification, the importance of falsification. And judgmental rationality was very consciously by Roy Bhaskar modeled on falsification. But it's a slightly different kind of falsification, but in principle it's the same. So essentially you're going out to falsify your particular theory by comparing it to other theories. And your theory is, if your theory cannot account for all of the information, then you know that it's basically been falsified. Okay, you know that it is incomplete. And obviously maybe not, you're not going to arrive at the perfect theory straight away. So the theory you choose to go with is the one that explains most of what the evidence shows. So it is a very clear way of choosing a theory, but obviously it is fallible because more information could arrive at a different time. Does that help, Gaia?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Okay.
So you've got on mute.
Sorry. Hello. I don't think we've got any more questions at the moment, so maybe we could go to our breakout rooms in a moment. But first of all, I'd really like to thank Lee very, very much for coming and explaining it so clearly. Thank you, Lee.
Absolute pleasure. And I'm going to have to go now, Priscilla.
Yes.
And I'm also struggling with the space. So, but it's lovely to be here and good luck with everything. And thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And we're going to follow up with your talk. Yes, thank you.
I'll send you my slides.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, Priscilla, and everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Now, when you go into your breakout rooms, we hope that you will take one of two themes and talk about how that relates to your research. Even if you're not using them, it's just interesting to put a new light on your work. One would be, are you using retroduction, or could you? Would it bring new insights and new common sense? And the other is, are you using critical discourse analysis, or would you like to? Are there any words, ideas that you think you could put to the kind of analysis that Rob has explained to us? How long should we have breakout rooms for, Rob?
Well, should we do, it's 5 to 7 now, so should we do 20 minutes, and then that should give us 15 minutes to come back and discuss afterwards, if that suits people. And if anyone's sort of ready to move, then just put it in the chat and I can move people around if they want to. Otherwise, should I do the usual thing of just sort of floating around the rooms, check everyone's getting on okay? Yeah, okay. So I'll put everyone in rooms. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so we'll be in rooms in about 1 minute. So we're opening all the rooms now. So see you all in the rooms in a minute. So I think you should be able to join them now. Hi everyone, we'll just wait for everyone else to get back in the room. Okay, I think we've got everyone back here. So I dropped into 3 or 4 breakout rooms then, and really lovely to meet a few new people. And thanks for all your really interesting comments that people were making. Priscilla's asked me to take over hosting, so you'll see that she's now she's currently sitting in the dark. So I'm not sure exactly what's happened. I think it's her camera rather than her actually being in the dark. So I suppose the first thing is just, did anyone have any questions they want to raise? I suppose I'll just start it off by just reflecting on what Lee was saying about falsifiability, and I'd imagine that other people have probably experienced this in talking to policymakers, that it's become this kind of sleight of hand, this methodological sleight of hand that she was describing, whereby people suggest that your knowledge needs to be tested in certain ways, is used, I found, almost universally to challenge reasonable, reasonable enlightened common sense, as she was saying. So is there anything that anyone wanted to raise, any questions that they had? And if there's anything of interest to the group as a whole? We've got about 10 minutes, so please speak out now. And I'm going to stop recording so that that gives people a bit more confidence.